My name is Reva Golden. My first name I was named after a lady that took care of my mother when she had my sister Ora, and she liked her so well that's why she named me Reva. My brother-in-law gave me a nickname. He called me Reva Mae Hendrickson Johnson Brown. I don't have a clue. Everybody called me Reva Mae, but it wasn't my name. I don't know why he did it. It was just his way of, just a friendly. Or my sister or his husband Cliff is the one that would call me that. But my whole family called me Reva Mae. I was born in Santaquin, Utah, September 10th, 1925. I have two sisters and one brother. My older sister's name was Sarah Marie, and my younger sister's name was Ora Elaine, and my brother's name was Ira Ward. Sarah was the oldest, but we called her Sadie, and then Ward was the second, and then Ora, and then me. My father's name was August Moroni Hendrickson, and my mother's name was Jenny Johnson Hendrickson. My mother was a school teacher when she met my father, and my father was a farmer, and he also sheared sheep. And he was sort of like the town vet, because he took care of animals for everybody. My dad he used to sing a lot in minstrels, and he had a tenor voice, beautiful tenor voice. And from what I've heard from people, he died when I was 4. But what I've heard from people in Santaquin, they said that he was the best and the fastest sheep shearer in the whole group that did. They went to Colorado, Wyoming, Nevada, and Utah shearing, and he was by far, he won all the shearing contests. He was so fast. But I don't remember only very little about him because I was so young. And my mom was very prominent in the city. She started the Santaquin City Library. She's the one that was instigated that, and she was the librarian there for years. She was also the city treasurer for 25 years. She was head of the civil defense. She was in Daughters of Pioneers, and so she was a very active lady. My grandparents, my mother's family, there were 11 children, and she was born and raised in Holden, Utah. And her father, my great-grandfather, was the one who founded Holden. His name was Willard Richard Johnson. And my father, his parents came over from Sweden. They were converts to the church, and they came to Santaquin. And my grandparents, my grandma and grandpa Hendrickson, their children, they lost so many of their children before they even were the age of 50. With some of them, they lost 2 while they were over in Sweden. They lost 2 children with some type of a flu, and then they had one daughter died in childbirth, and another daughter died. She was kicked in the stomach with a horse, and one brother was killed in a mine accident, the cave-in in a mine, and the other brother was going out to the outhouse and fell over a chopping block and broke his neck. And another one of the brothers was, they were building the railroad, and they had a lot of giant caps that they were blasting out the area, and he put them in his pockets, and they exploded and they killed him. My dad died with cancer, and then his younger brother, and then the one sister died. She was probably in her 60s, and then his younger brother lived to be in his 90s. But my dad was 50 when he died. started school, my birthday is September 10th, and I started first grade on my birthday. And I lived a mile from school, and I went to school. The school was all day. We didn't have kindergarten. And when it came recess, I went home because I figured I'd been to school long enough, so I went home, walked a whole mile home by myself. And it was, we had a lot of fun. We played jacks and jumped the rope, and the school that I went to, they had grades from 1 to 9, and when I started kindergarten, or first grade, never went to kindergarten. My older sister, Ora, was in the 9th grade, so we'd go to school together, but then after she graduated, of course, she went to Payson High School. We just hadn't, I liked all my teachers. I liked school. I got fairly good grades, except I was not, when I got older, my math was the hard thing for me. Algebra, I just could not. Everything else I got fairly good grades in, but that one it was my worst subject. I usually, my whole life, for years and years, my summers were spent weeding the gardens, picking cherries or apples or fruit, raspberries or what have you. I grew up, that's the way, anything that was in season that we had, or I helped other people. I babysat a lot in the summers. Mostly just until I got a bicycle, I mostly was just usual childhood, play the childhood games with. I had girlfriends close and things that we did together. When I got a little old enough, then I used to, every week my mother took care of the water, and so I would take the water notices for people to take their irrigation water to every place in town. So I got a lot of bike riding in and a lot of walking in. So I'd do that every week. I knew we were poor. Because my father I was born during the Depression, and everybody was poor. And my mom, she quit teaching school when she got married, so she never renewed her certificate or anything. And so she would, until she finally, in her later years, she went to work back for the school district again, but she would clean houses or take care of people that were sick. Then she was like the sit-down nurse or what have you. So, but she did anything she could to keep from going on welfare, which she never would go on welfare. She was able to provide for us. And well, I don't remember my father, but with my mother, we got along beautifully. I mean, she worked a lot, so I was left alone a lot. But she taught me a lot of good values and what have you. We got along great. I'd go to a movie and I'd see things and I'd come home and try it, no matter what it was. Everything from jumping out our second-story window onto my mom's mattress with an umbrella to. I decided that and I even put things in our peach or apple trees, and I'd swing from one like Tarzan till the rope broke one day. But anyway, I decided I wanted to fly, so I made these great big cardboard wings, great big ones. And it was a very windy March day, so I climbed up on the chicken coop, put my arms in the wings, and started flapping really fast, and the wind caught me and carried me and the cardboard wings clear down to the end of our yard and dumped me right in the biggest burr patch you ever saw. I had burrs in my hair, all over my clothes, everywhere. I was a mess. My mother was very upset. Well, on Saturdays they had a serial of Tarzan every week. Every time we'd go to a movie, you could see a little short about Tarzan. So I went home. My girlfriend Grace Marie, who lived just 2 or 3 doors away from me, we decided that we would make swings. So we had an apple orchard, and the trees were evenly spaced. So we tied ropes on from one tree and then ropes on the other tree, and we could swing from one tree and then catch the rope from the other. And we did that until one day I did it and the rope broke and I lit right on my chin, my face, and my poor mother. That was the end of our Tarzan experience. Couldn't do that. But it was fun. We were always, we were very adventurous, both of us. And I was klutzy, very klutzy. I was always falling. My mother carried a first aid kit instead of a makeup kit in her purse. When I was a kid, my favorite spot, I don't know whether this is interesting to anybody, we had a big white cherry tree, which was in the front yard of the house that Don and I had in Santa Quin. And it had a great big trunk, and the trunk came down, and so it was just like a hammock that you could sit, and then there was a post that came so you could put your legs like that and just lay right on that trunk. So whenever I wanted to be alone or I wanted to get out of doing something, I'd run and climb the top of that tree. And that's where I spent hours and hours. Well, when we decided we got the property there to build our house, I wouldn't let them take the tree down. And that trunk stayed there until it just finally rotted and went completely down. Matter of fact, everybody kept saying, you need to take that down, because the tree kind of got, they kept trimming it down until it was just nothing but a stump. But that was my favorite tree. So finally, when we had to have everything taken down, but that was like losing a best friend. I never played with dolls when I was kids. I don't even remember having one doll. But I played with paper dolls a lot. I had all kinds of paper dolls, and I would play that, and I loved to play board games, and I was pretty good at jacks. I could play, and jumping the rope. I was really good at those, but my brother would make me a jumping rope. He'd braid the handle. Every fall he would every spring he'd make me a neat jump the rope and make the handles the way he'd put special knots to make a handle so that you could hold on to and then jump. And so I did that a lot. But I was never one to play dolls or what have you. I'd dress up. My mom had a lot of old clothes in the attic, and I'd dress up when I was a kid, but I never was one to play with just dolls like most girls do. I never did that. Paper dolls, but not dolls. And we had a horse that it would just run, an adult get on her and she would just jump out from under everybody. And I could get on her and she wouldn't even get off a walk. No matter how much I'd hit her or kick her or something, a kid get on her, so I never learned to ride a horse because I couldn't get the horse off of a walk. But Ora and Ward and Sadie and them could ride her like, they'd go like the wind, but she wouldn't do that for me. I loved her, but she would never, she knew I was a child, I guess, and she would never, no matter how much I tried, she wouldn't go off a walk. So I never learned that. And I loved to sleigh ride in the winter time. We loved to do that. I went to junior high school in Santa Quin, and then I went to Payson High School and graduated from Payson High School and from the seminary in Payson also. When I was in high school, we were able to decide whether we wanted to, as one of the things to take, we could either take dancing or PE. and I took dancing all the time, and we'd put on these big dance recitals, and I loved it because I loved anything that had anything to do with dancing. And so when I remember the last one that we put on, I was probably in at least 10 of the dances. I still have the program, but a lot of dances. We did Dances of the Nations, and I loved that. And I liked biology. Those were my favorite classes that I took in high school. Hated algebra. I had 6 best friends in high school. There, June Ferry was one, and Adele LeBaron, Wilma O'Kander, and Betty Heelis, and Marcia Greenouch, and then we had others that we went with, but mostly my closest friend was Adele LeBaron. I don't keep in contact with any of my friends anymore. Adele was, I've seen her a time or two, but I just don't. Since I moved down here, haven't been able to keep track of any of them. Some I know 2 or 3 have passed away, but that's one thing I regret, guys. Is I would love to have had a Santa Quinn reunion so I could have gotten back with the friends that are still alive, but they're not. One thing that I could tell you about my friends that I thought was unusual is we had put on a dance at one of the church functions they had, and our mothers made us denim skirts. They come just below the knee, and then when we went to high school, we weren't allowed to wear denim. That was, not supposed to wear denim. But anyway, so they made us these skirts, and then we had red bandana blouses that matched it. We did a Western dance. And when we got to high school, our principal called us in and told us that we had to go home and change clothes. Now, we lived 6 miles from high school, so we had to walk home the 6 miles, but we didn't change our clothes and come back. We waited and came back to school the next day, but that's how strict the code was of dressing code when I went to school. Boys wore dress pants, girls wore dresses or skirts and sweaters, it was very strict. And we thought that we had a good time walking that 6 miles home. But we had a lot of fun too. We did a lot of sleigh riding parties, and we had so much fun together. And we also there was some boys in our town that we all did things as a group. We'd go to weenie roasts, and we'd go up the canyon hiking and what have you. It was a fun time. But my worst memory of high school was my mom had made me this beautiful white formal, and she'd appliqued flowers on it was lace top and she'd appliqued and put these, spent hours and hours on it for the junior prom. And the junior prom was on Friday night, and on Wednesday night, the group, we all decided we were going to flood the coasting hill and go sleigh riding, and so the girls made chili, boys made ice cream. We went up, and I was the first one down the hill, and I hit some ruts and went face first right into a car. So I was not able to go to my first junior prom. We took a vacation one time and went down to Bryce Canyon with my Uncle Bert and his family. But that's the only family vacations that I remember us ever taking. And that was not too long after my father died. My grandkids said I should tell about the pig story. When I was young, I don't remember exactly how old, I was in a hurry. I think I must have been in Mutual, which is Young Women's now. And I was hurrying. I had to feed the pig, and it was a great big pig. And I took the food over, the slop, and the pig just kept jumping up, and I couldn't empty the bucket that I had. So I picked up a board and hit him right behind the ear, and it killed him. And so my mom had to go get the neighbors to come and kill the pig, because that was our winter meat. So they they were skinning the pig at night under the lights and boiling water and getting the pig. I felt so terrible because I had killed it. But when I was working at Kmart, then I mentioned the story, and so pigs became famous to me. So every birthday, everything, I had a big collection of everything from pillboxes to mechanical pigs that the people at Kmart gave to me after that. At one meeting, especially, they gave me my first bronze pig. It was a little one, and they put it in a little, like a dish that you put hot dogs in, little cardboard with its feet in the air, and they played that death march, and they said, the boss said, "Dearly beloved, we're gathered together this morning in memory of a dead pig." And then they gave me this little this pig that they came in with the pig with its feet in the air. And then I got one that snorted and walked across the floor, so I got all kinds of pigs from everybody because of that one story. My favorite thing to do is to go to theme parks and ride roller coasters. I love roller coasters. There used to have an old wooden one that went out. It was called the Pike at Long Beach, California. And it was rickety sounding, and it'd go way out over the ocean and then back in on land. And every time we'd go to California, I'd have to go ride that I'd ride it at least 2 or 3 times before we left the park. And then, of course, I love to ride all the rides at Disneyland. And my last favorite, I've ridden all of them here in Las Vegas, but I haven't ridden the one at the Stratosphere because it kept breaking down. But the one I love the most is out at Primm, and it's out at Wild Bill, out at Primm. And it is really fun. You go out and then it goes high and then you drop down, and that's my favorite one. It's a rough one, but I love those things. But I can't do roller coasters anymore because I've lost the calcium crystals in my ear, and the ear specialist said no more roller coasters. And I hate that because I love to ride them. I went down, took Andrew, my grandson, down. Well, took Dallas down, and I had to ride it twice before we could leave. And I think his friends were all disgusted with me because I had to go twice. I didn't, once wasn't enough. Then I took Andrew down one time, and every time I'd go out there, somebody'd come up to me and say, "Do you know you're standing in the roller coaster line?" Like they think I'm going to die on it, I guess. But anyway, we rode the roller coaster, and then we went out and we're going to ride the Shot, and nobody was getting on it. So Andrew and I got on, and we rode the Shot, and when we came down, everybody started going out, and I told Andrew, I said, "Well, it didn't kill the old lady or the kids, so now they're going to ride it." But I love to ride them. My husband's name was Don Carl Golden, and I first met him in September, oh gosh, can't remember the year. It was the year I turned 16. I had just turned 16 when I met him. And I just met him, we didn't date. It was a couple of weeks later before we ever had a date. But I met him, and then went to a Halloween party, and he was there. And he had said he came to Santa Quin to meet me, but because his sister's name was Reva, so he was curious. His friends were dating my girlfriends, and we went to this Halloween party and he was there, but I didn't pay much attention to him. And so then the following Friday, he came to school with a big box of chocolates and asked me to go out with him. He said, I had totally ignored him before, but he said he'd like me to go at least one date with him, so I accepted, and that's how we met, and we started dating, but not too awfully regular, but we did start dating then. Our first date, we went to dinner and then to a movie. Our courtship was different, I guess, than a lot of people, because at the time everybody was not wealthy, so we didn't go to a lot of expensive places, but we would have parties in groups in houses. We'd go to homes and play games, board games and what have you, and that was mostly our entertainment. Or in the wintertime we'd go sleigh riding or something, but and we'd go to dances. Definitely, we did a lot of dancing, practically every week. But all the towns would have a dance, so they'd come up and we'd go, and it was very cheap to go to the dance, and so that was, I think, our main courtship were dancing or those parties, and in the summertime we did go, we'd go to the mountains or what have you, but everything that we did was pretty much in a group and not anything big and elaborate, but just plain fun. I was proposed to after a dance the first time, which I said no, and it was after a dance and we'd been to dinner, but there was no ring involved. He just asked me to marry me. But the final proposal, where he gave me the diamond, was just before he went into the service, and he proposed to me and gave me the diamond then.
And
we were married January the 18th, 1944, in the Salt Lake Temple. Don had came home on furlough. We had gotten engaged in March before, when he left in the service. And he came home on furlough, and his sister and her husband were going to the Salt Lake Temple to be, they were going to be endowed then. And so they asked us they said, why don't we make it a double wedding and you guys go with us and get married now? And so we looked at each other and said, well, why not? Because we planned to get married anyway, so we went and we got married at the same time as they did. And that's how come we got, but it was so hectic we had to run around, get our marriage license, our blood tests and everything all in one day. And so we spent the whole day just running back and forth, getting blood tests, taking them up to the state capitol to be tested, and then back. We didn't think we was going to make it, but we finally made it. And so we got married about 6 o'clock on January 18th, so we did make it. It was nice for the four of us to get married at the same time. Of course, they were already married. They just had their sealing and their little boy sealed to them. I think the most important thing that I saw in Don was he was kind and considerate, and he was fun. We had a good time. We like to do the same things. I think that's a very important factor, because we love to dance and we like to do the same things. What I loved and admired about him was because he was good to me, and he was good to the boys, and he was good to everybody. He was kind and considerate. I mean, he came home, to tell you just for an instant, he came home one time. We had a 52 Plymouth, and then we had he'd bought another car, a Chevy, and I think Jason was about 14 when this happened. But anyway, he bought the 52 Plymouth when he first moved to Henderson, and he came home and he said, there's a guy coming to get the Plymouth. And I said, what do you mean he's coming to get the Plymouth? He said, I gave him the Plymouth. And I said, you gave him the Plymouth? Because that was my car kind of driving, and no, the Chevy was mine, but He said, yes. And I said, what do you mean you gave it to him? And he said, well, they have a little boy that has to go to Vegas to the doctor all the time. And he said, remember when Jason we had to take him to go for therapy all the time? He said, well, they don't have a car. And the buses don't run the hour to from Boulder City to Vegas, so they have no way to get there. So he said, I told him he could have the car. And I said, he said, okay. So, and he gave another lady needed the washer, so he gave her my washer and bought me a new one, and that's the way he did. He was very, very giving, and he was one that you could, very dependable. If you were to say, he'd say he'd be here at 4 o'clock, he'd be there probably 3:30. He was very, very dependable in everything he did. And he loved his family. And well, Don was, he was born and raised in Nephi. He he didn't quite graduate. He lacked, actually, he could have done, but 2 weeks before graduation, a teacher threw a book at him and hit him in the head, because he'd forgotten he'd been working out on the farm, and he didn't have time to go home and get his books. He'd left his books home, and the teacher asked him to read something, and he told him he didn't have a book. So he threw the book at him and hit him in the head. And it made Don mad, so he threw the book back at him and he expelled him. So and it was an English class, and so he wouldn't let him graduate. He wouldn't let him graduate. So he didn't get to graduate. And but he did attend on, I don't know what you would call it, but he went to Carbon College, which was College of Southern or Eastern Utah now, but it was called Carbon then. He went there for a time, I don't know exactly how long, and then he went to Weber State College for a while, and I don't know what he majoring in or anything. He told me, but I've forgotten what that was. But anyway, he worked on the farm and worked for farmers and got cattle off the mountain and what have you, and roundups when it came time and what have you. And he bought his group of friends. They had one of the guys, it was older than the other boys, and they called him Gunpowder. So he was known in Nephi as part of the Gunpowder gang. But it was a group of boys, and then that was the group that was dating with my girlfriends, and then he was an excellent swimmer. He was on the swim team at high school. Excellent swimmer, and but this same teacher, when Don got out of the service, he wanted to go to BYU to school, and he lacked getting his English credit because the teacher had held up his credit. All the rest of, he got all the rest of his credits that he couldn't have, so he could graduate. And he went over, I went with him, and we went over, he was teaching in Orem, and we went over and went into team, and he told Don, when Don went, he said, I don't care what you want to do. He says, I'll never give you those grades, ever, no matter what. And he said, Don said, you mean you're holding this against my head, over my head, for me throwing that book back at you? And he said, yeah, that and showing me up at one time. And what he showed him up at is, and so he wouldn't give him the grade, so he didn't get to go to, he could have gone on a GI scholarship, but because of this man, he couldn't go. And his name was Harry Bigley. But anyway, when Don was 12. The city got or the church, the ward, I guess, I don't know. Anyway, this group got a permit from the Wildlife Association to go and get a deer for a big banquet that they were having, a big dinner. Could get a couple of deer. The bunch of guys that were going to go kill the deer came down and wanted Don's dad to go because Don's dad was an excellent shot. And he said no, he couldn't go, he had something, but he said take Don. Don is a good shot. And he said take Don, he'll do a fine. So they went out. Well, as they did, they kind of paired up in twos, and they sent Don with him. And he told Don, he said, now if you see something, you let me know, and don't you try to kill it or anything. He said, you know, you just scare them out for me because I'm the best. And he told all the guys, he said, well, now this came from Don's father, not just Don, that this happened. And then Harry Black, who was one of the guys, told me too, because he was at one time. And he said, you know, that you don't try to shoot or anything, I'll just take care of it because I'll be the one that gets the deer, you know, because I'm a good shot. And so anyway, he would brag to all the guys that he was definitely getting the deer. Well, anyway, he sent Don down through an area. Well, Don just kept going. Finally, Don saw the deer and he just killed the deer. Well, when he remembered, because he'd left in such a hurry, he had forgotten to take his knife. So he found a fruit jar and broke the fruit jar, and he cleaned and cut and cleaned that deer with pieces of a fruit jar. Well, when the guys came, you know, they came to saw him cleaning that up without, of course, then he'd already cut its throat and started, and the scent bags off, you know, and none of the rest of them, that was the only deer that was gotten. Well, he was, you know, then they started teasing Harry because, well, look who got the deer. You were going to get it, and look who got it. And I guess Don was kind of the town hero to think he not only got it at 12, outdid all the men, but he cleaned it with a fruit jar, pieces of glass in a fruit jar, and hadn't even cut himself. And so he still held a grudge of that, so he never would give him his credit, so he couldn't go. So anyway, he went to work at Geneva Steel Company, and that's where he worked until we moved to Nevada. This was after he got out of the service. But when he was in the service, he went to school, and I have certificates for all different. He worked for he went to school at Cadillac Motors and Alice Chalmers, and I can't remember which, but anyway, he was supposed to be in the service to repair tanks and things because of all his training that he'd had, because they were Cadillac Motors. And when he got overseas, they'd send guys out on supply line and they'd get lost, you know. And so one day, Don said, well, I can't believe they can't go out and get lost or they can't come back. And of course, bear in mind, not only did they have to avoid the enemy, but they had to avoid Patton's army too, because Patton would hold them up and take their supplies, if they have their own company supplies. And so Don says, well, I can't believe they can't go out and find, you know, get back in a day or two. They can't do this. And so his captain said, well, Big Mouth, let's see what you do. So they sent him out, and he was right back with the load. And so he ended up, that's what he did. He ran supply line from then on while he was in Germany, because he never got lost, and he could go, and he knew how to avoid not only the enemy lines, but he said it was just about as dangerous going through Patton's army as it was going through the enemy lines, even because he'd hold them up and take their supplies, you know. And he was able to, he was in the station, service station, and General Eisenhower came in with his who later became President Eisenhower, came in, and his car was not running very good, and he had a Cadillac. And so when the guy called him, they called him Goldie, and they said, Goldie, the General Eisenhower's out here. He said, something's wrong with his car. Do you think you could do anything with it? And so Don went out and he fixed his car, and he said they chatted for quite a while, while he was there. And so he asked him, he said, what are you doing, and what are you going to do after the war? And he said he didn't know. But anyway, he said, well, you definitely should be working with motors, And so when, anyway, he got out and he went to work at Geneva Steel. Well, when his brother, now he got out in March, and he was, this was in June. His brother Glenn was getting married, and so we were living in Santa Quin at the time, and his mother asked me to come down and help her get ready because they were going to have the wedding at the house. And so I went down and I asked her what she wanted me to do, and she said she wanted me to clean the cupboards in the kitchen. So I was cleaning. Her cupboards went clear to the ceiling, and so I was standing on the countertop cleaning, and I found, when I got up there, I was taking the dishes out to wash the shelves, and I found this letter, and it was to Don, and it was from Cadillac Motors. And so I called Don and I said, Don, here's the letter for you and it had been opened. And what it was, I guess, I don't know whether General Eisenhower had gotten in touch with him, but anyway, because of Don's high grades that he got when he was going to school, they wanted him to come back to to Detroit, and then he would be a troubleshooter for Cadillac Motors, go wherever they wanted in the United States. And he had 60 days, I think, to respond. But anyway, Don's mother had kept the letter, and when he called, they said that they'd kept it for him way over the time limit, but he hadn't responded, so they'd gotten someone else. And she said the reason she didn't give it to him was because she didn't want him to move back to Michigan, so she never gave him the letter. But I have a lot of his certificates and things that he got but he never followed that, never worked on motors, but that's what he did really good there. And he worked at Geneva Steel in Provo, and then he came down here, and he worked for Montrose. Well, he was hired through Stauffer, but he worked in Montrose, which was 2 units in together. And in Montrose clothes, so he was strictly until he had his heart attack and had to retire. But he was working over one day, and he was the only one that did that particular job that he was doing. He was really a pipe fitter by trade, but he learned to mix Havoc and SRAM stuff to line tanks, rubber line tanks or line tanks and things. And so they had a tank go out, and he called me and said he was staying over, and he'd be late coming home to go ahead and for us to have dinner, and then he'd come on home. And so after it was a little later on, it was after the shift was over with, and he was on overtime, when Janet called me and told me my mother had died. And so I called the plant and talked to his foreman, and told him, well, that I just got word that my mother died, and would he get word to Don? And he said, I'll have him come home right now. He said, I'll call somebody else out and have him come home. So I said, okay. So he came home, and he got the car, because he had driven his truck to work, and got the car and went down and was gassing up the car at the service station when he saw the plant ambulance going over to the hospital. And come to find out, man that they had called in to take Don's place, they'd had this explosion at the plant and he was killed. And the other guy that was with him was burned really, really bad. And so, because Don had, when he saw the plant, then he went over to the emergency room to see what was going on, and they told him that's what had happened. So I've always said my mother's death saved Don's life, you know, because he would have been right there had it not have happened. But he, and then right after she died, see, why, they had to call him right back after the funeral because there was nobody that could fix it but Don, so he had to go back, and so he worked there until they closed that plant. And then he went back into Stauffer, but then he had his heart attack. He had heart surgery 8 years before he died. And he was an excellent dancer, and he was, when he died, he was executive secretary to the bishop in the church. And Don was one that he never was in the limelight. He always, no matter what, like I said, he loved to hunt and fish. He could fix anything. He was great at fixing anything. And he belonged to the union. He was always, one thing with Don, no matter, even if he was on strike, he always found a job of some kind. He'd work while, he was never out of work from the time we got married till he retired. Because if it was even one time when Geneva was on strike, he couldn't find anything, but he went out and picked up potatoes in a field for money and what have you. He always, you know, he was always working. And like I say, he was anything, anything he was, you know, he would help me no matter what. And I could have anything we could afford. He would never, ever once said no, you know. When we got married, he said the rules that he wanted, he said, when we get married, there's some rules I want set down. And I said, okay, if I can, we'll see what they are. And he told me, and one of them was, we never quarrel over money. Another one, we never go to bed on a quarrel, because his parents quarreled all the time, you know. And then the other one was, we never quarrel at the table. No, never any unpleasantness at the table. And I can't, there was two more, but I can't think of what they were. I can't think. But most of them were about quarreling, because his parents quarreled every meal they had. They would quarrel, you know, because he drank, and they quarreled all the time. And I remember the first time we moved in this house to make it, they came down to see us, and we were just sitting down to dinner, and Don's dad had been down to the casino and he'd been drinking, and he came home and they started to quarrel, and Don took both hands and he just hit the table hard like this and said, go outside. He said, we don't quarrel at our table. And so I couldn't even correct the kids' table manners they had because at the table while we were eating, because he didn't ever want any unpleasantness when meals were going on. And we never did quarrel over money either. We never had a quarrel over money in all the years, and we, like 6 days of being 44 years married when he died, and had never had a quarrel over money. If it was gone, it was gone, or, you know, he never ever asked me where I spent a dime, but we worked everything out together, paid bills together and things like that. Everything we did together, you know, but never ever. And like I said, we didn't go to bed, sleep on a quarrel either. We stayed up late a few times, but we never did go to, and I can't think what the other two were. There was two others. They weren't, but those were the main ones. And because he just said absolutely those are things that, and I can't remember what the other two were. There's two more, but anyway, he was an excellent shot too. Like I said, he really, and his funeral was like state conference. One of the biggest funerals I've attended in this town. It was, they had to open the chapel and it was, the recreation hall was filled. I was just amazed at how big a funeral he had. Because he was never in the limelight at all, you know. He got the biggest deer that was caught one year that came into the processing plant, you know, where to have it cut up and that. And he'd go out and he could, he never ever had any problem getting his deer. He always came home with the deer. And like I said, he was very generous, and he was a good man, really good man. He was good to me. And he was not, what should I say, he wasn't a sociable person like a lot, you know, but he loved to dance. We always went dancing, and he came one day. I think one of the things that I remember most about him was he was not one that would bring you flowers or what have you. He always remembered your, you know, birthday or Mother's Day, but the only flowers he gave me was when the boys were in the hospital or I was in the hospital. But he always gave me a big orchid for Mother's Day, and I always got an Easter lily for Easter and a poinsettia at Thanksgiving time. And Jennifer still gives me an orchid on Mother's Day because Grandpa gave me one, you know, so she still does. But that was his flowers, that he was not one that was, you know, he was, I always remember your birthday or that, you know, but as far as in between bringing gifts, he didn't do that. But he came, I was working at the dress shop at this one time, and he said he was going to take me to dinner. We were going to dinner, so I said, okay. So I said, don't you think I ought to go home and change? No, he said, you look fine. So we drove, and I thought, well, maybe he was going to Prim, and we didn't get to Prim, and we were still going, you know, and finally we got to Barstow, and I said, where in the world are we going to have dinner? You know, I thought we were just going to dinner. He said, no, we're going to Disneyland. And I said, we're going to Disneyland? He said, yes. And he said, we're going to eat dinner here in Barstow. And then we'll go on to Disneyland. And I said, well, I don't have any clothes. And he said, yeah, you do. I've got them all packed. Everything's packed in the back. And so we went down and we spent, he had Monday off, so I guess we spent 3 days in California, you know. And the only thing he had forgotten was my extra nylons. But he'd brought everything else I needed, was fine. And it hadn't even dawned on me, but it was my birthday. And I had even forgotten that it was my birthday. And so we went to Disneyland, and of course we got there just as it opened. And we stayed in a motel right by Disneyland. And so Don, I guess, had gone up and told the guys, you know, they have the ribbon across or something. And anyway, he told them it was my birthday. And so they wanted me to come and cut the ribbon because it was my birthday. I wouldn't do it, but I said, no, absolutely no, I'm not going to. And so they announced over and had somebody else went up and cut the ribbon anyway so they could go into Disneyland. But and then he had I can't remember the place. It was some place where we were in Disneyland. that they brought me out a little cake with a candle on it for my birthday that he'd arranged for. But we had it was fun. He was very dependable, that he was. If he said he'd do it, no matter what. And you could set your watch by him when coming and going to work, unless he had to work over, but he'd always call me. Oh, I know the other one. I was never to wait a meal for him, we were to eat when it was ready, we were to eat, and never make the boys wait for dinner for him. That was another one. They were all simple little rules, but they were quirks for him, you know. Things that he'd had in his childhood that he didn't want in our boys' childhood. Because his father was an alcoholic. They gave away when he went in the service. He had a car. He had this was negative, but he had a car and he had cattle on the range, some cattle, and one of the guys that he used to work with had helped him get his range permit when he was in the FFA in high school. Told him, he said, well, I'll run your cattle with mine, you know, so you won't have to worry about it while you're gone in the service. And he said, you can, you know, if your cows have calves, I'll keep those for you, you know, make sure you have it when you get back. He was working on the railroad at the time he went in the service. He enlisted in Nevada, so he's a Nevada veteran, not a Utah veteran. And he enlisted. He wasn't drafted. He enlisted. And he was working on the UP Railroad at the time. And then he had a 37 Ford car. It looks like a PT Cruiser, so much like a PT Cruiser. And when he came home on furlough when we got married, he didn't have one thing. His mom had gotten rid of everything he had. They'd sold his car 2 weeks after he went. They sold his car. He didn't even have a pair of shoes, a pair of socks, a pair of pants. He wanted to go ride the horse, and they had gotten rid of everything he owned. He had nothing. So when he got out of the service, I met him in Salt Lake, and we spent a week up there just like a second honeymoon, and we had to buy him a whole new wardrobe of clothes and everything, because he had nothing. But he was able to get 2 of his guns back. He went to the guys that his dad had sold them to and asked them if they'd sell them back to him, and they did. So he was able to get those 2 back, but that was the only things he got back. His dad had sold his cattle and his range permit and everything. He had nothing when he came home. And his birthday is the day after Christmas. He was born the 22nd or 26th of December 1922. And the first year that I went with him for Christmas, Mom and I both gave him a birthday gift. And he was sitting there and he was opening Mom's gift and tears were running down his face. And I said to him, "Are you crying?" "No." I said, "Yes, you are. What's wrong?" And he said that was the first birthday gifts he'd ever had in his life. He said everything before had been Merry Christmas, Happy Birthday. And that was the first birthday gifts he'd ever had, just strictly birthday gifts. And he said, so he was very touched about it, you know, touched over it. I was out in his dune buggy one Saturday, and I was working, and he came home and he said, I was working for Marigold at that time, and he came home and he said, "I have seen the funniest thing out there today." He went out by Black Mountain, which is out here, and he said it wasn't a Jeep, it wasn't a Coots, I don't know what it was. He said it was a big silver thing. I have no idea what it was. But he said I couldn't go up any closer because they had the BLM big old 18-wheeler was parked across, so you couldn't get through the gorge any farther. And so he said I stopped right next to it and got out and looked, and I could see this going out, and I didn't know what it was. And this was on a Saturday. And so when the Henderson Home News came out on Thursday, there was this picture on the front of the paper, and it said, due to the fact that everybody was going out there to see what it was, and what it was the rover that they were testing to go on the moon when they went to the moon. And they were testing it out there because they felt it was more like the moon surface than any place else. And so that's what it was. He got to see it, but I didn't. And we have seen X-15s drop from here, and we used to go out and watch the bombs every morning, you know, the atom bombs. And they had one bomb, it was see, that's 60 to 75 miles away, depending on the areas out at the test site. And it was 4 o'clock in the morning. Our neighbor worked out the test site, and he said they were going to set the hydrogen bomb off. They only set one off. And we got up at 4 o'clock in the morning. It was dark as pitch, and went outside. When the bomb went off, I had picked Dennis up. Dennis was only 2, and I had wrapped him in a blanket and was carrying Dennis. And we got out there, and that bomb went off. It was so bright when it went off. I looked down, and Dennis had broken out with measles, and I could tell it. And it was pitch dark outside. And then after the first initial big shot, then everything went red. Just everything. It just looked like, it was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. Everything was red as red. My first job after I left home, I was married, and I went to Texas. Don was in the service, and I went to Texas to live with Don. And I worked at a bus depot. I sold tickets for the buses that went out to the camp, and they had a coffee shop. And so in between bus runs, I would help in the coffee shop. And I worked there while we lived in Texas until I got malaria fever, and then I had to quit working because I got malaria and was sick there. I had a strange experience that I don't know whether anybody would be interested in it, but I was naive. It's the first time I had been around a few black people in my day, but I could not handle the segregation that was at that time. It was so bad, and they had buses that had big white lines in the back, and they're only the back about 3 seats, and the black people, they called them colored then, would have to go to the back. They couldn't go forward. And I was on this bus. We were living out just barely outside of town, and I was riding the bus to go in to meet Don when he came in from camp, and so I caught the bus, and we were going to go to dinner and to a movie. And the back was filled with black people behind the line, and this lady got on, and I was sitting on the front, and she was black and had a baby in her hand and some things, and I asked her if I could help her and told her to sit down by me. And of course she didn't. She just ignored me and went right to the back and crunched in with the rest of them. And the bus driver said, she can't sit there. And my first bout with segregation, I said, well, I can't see why. She paid the same amount of money as I did to ride there, and all these seats are empty, and you're making her go to the back. And he said, yes, she's got to go to the back. And I said, well, that's wrong. And he said, stop the bus. And he said, get off, and don't you ever ride my bus again. So I got kicked off the bus because I tried to let a black lady sit by me. That was one of the funniest experiences I had while we were in the service, because that, and of course getting malaria was not a fun thing either. But aside from that in Texas, then when I came back from Texas, I went to work for a cleaning establishment in Provo, Utah. It was called Troy. And I worked there until Don came home from the service. And then we went to Nephi, and we bought a little house in Nephi, and he was working at a service station, and the people that owned it had the service station and a motel, and they had to go to Montana for a while, so Don and I ran the motel. I did the motel, and he done the service station while they were gone. And then my next job, I worked a night shift over at the Del Monte Cannery Company, and when Jason was little, I worked over there for a while because Don was on strike at the plant, and so I worked at night over at Del Monte Cannery, and then I didn't do any work until let's see, I think that was, I worked a little bit during the war. I forgot, after while Don was overseas, besides the cleaning place, I worked in a fast food place for a little while on weekends at night. And then when I came to Henderson, we moved to Henderson, and I went to work when Dennis was going on his mission, so I had not worked until then. And just before that, while the boys were in high school, I worked for Marigold Dairy. I did some food demonstrating for like 2 or 3 days a week. And then from there, I went over to and worked at Anita's dress shop. And then when Anita's sold out to Arden's, it was Arden's, and they sold out to Anita's. And then I co-managed the dress shop till about 1976 or 77. And then I didn't work anymore until I went to work for Kmart. And I worked for Kmart for 21 years and retired when I was 79. Well, with my career, what I've done, I've always worked with the public, and I was an extremely introverted person. I was before, and if my jobs did nothing else, it taught me how to speak to people and not be afraid to talk to people. I was always scared to death to talk to people, and of course with my jobs I had to talk to people. And I think that was the most beneficial thing aside from, of course, the money was good too, and I think the vast majority of friends that I have with customers and what have you, it's so rewarding if you go in the grocery store and all of a sudden somebody comes up and put their arm around you, or say they remember, they sure miss you at work. And I think it was very satisfying, all the people that I've met, the different walks of life and different colors, different religion, and being able to be in contact with all different kinds of people. Kmart came out with the program that the Employee of the Year, and I got the first Employee of the Year certificate that was ever given out in our store. And I got lots of Employees of the Month certificates. I got however, I don't have them now, but I got a lot of certificates that they kept in the store of people who complimentary customers certificates. I got a lot of those while I was working, it was nice. That's what, I met a lot of lovely people. And that was kind of rewarding to know that people cared, that you'd helped them. Where I've gone, I have been to not counting, well, I guess you should count them. I've been to every state in the Union except 6. I've been 4 back east and 2 Hawaii and Alaska. I've been to Guatemala, I've been to Honduras, Mexico several times, Canada several times, England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and Spain. I think the ones that I learned the most and enjoyed, I think, the most were England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, and Spain. There was so much history and what have you. I learned a lot about those countries that I didn't have any clue. And I also enjoyed especially seeing what they consider the area where the Book of Mormon days in Honduras and Guatemala, the remains there, the towers and things there, and also in Mexico. So I enjoyed every one of them, but I think because I learned a lot from those, but I think the trip that I probably had the most fun, and it was Don and it was right after Ora's husband Cliff died, and Clifford and Larry Olson, friends of ours, called and wanted us to come down and go camping with them, and we had to go in 4-wheel drive outfits. So we called and asked my brother Ward and my sister Ora to go with us, and they met us down at in Fremont, Utah. And Don and I and Ora and Ora and Ward and Clifford and Larry Olson, we all went in. Clifford had a Land Rover, and we called it Sherman. And my brother Ward had a 4-wheel drive truck. And we went clear down through, there's no roads or anything. We cut off and went in the desert. We took camping gear, tents and things, and we went clear down to where the Green River and the Colorado River meet. And in that week we went through, saw a petrified forest that you could see there was no car tracks, nothing, we went in areas where people just don't go. You couldn't find a tin can or a gum wrapper or anything. And we didn't even put up our tents, we just slept on the ground and we roughed it. It was a real rough trip. But it was, I think of all the trips I've ever had, I think I remember that most because it was so much fun. And when we think about it, we were out there where there was no one. We were out in the wilderness, totally. If something had happened, I don't know, but we finally we came back up around Lake Powell and then back, and it was a rough trip as far as sleeping and the camping goes, but no modern conveniences, but it was a wonderful trip. And it was so good for Ora because it was just right after her husband had died, and we had such a good time. It was really a good time, and that was one of the rougher trips. But I think another one that was special was the Yosemite trip that we took with the boys when the boys were little. We had a lot of fun at that trip because we went all over and saw so much, and the boys enjoyed it, and they were fun to go with, and I thought that was a fun trip too. And then I think another one that stands out that was the most relaxing and what have you trip was when I went to Branson, and we saw 10 shows at Branson, and everything was done for us, that we didn't have to do any walking, any thinking, nothing. It was everything. It was just like Queens. Oh, we had one trip too that I should say we lived like royalty. We went down to Cancun, and when we got there, the tour that we were on, the hotel where we were to stay, Henry Kissinger and his entourage had came over and took over the whole hotel. So we were more or less kicked out of the hotel. We had to go, and so they moved us up the beach to a hotel. Everybody on the trip was scattered in different hotels. And Don and I got into a hotel. We were right at the end where the Atlantic meets the Pacific, comes around in that area or whatever, right at the corner anyway. And we had our own villa, and it was our own private beach, our own everything. It was deluxe luxury, and that was a fun trip too. But then of course we were touring Mexico, but that was the perfect place if you were going to go on a honeymoon that we had, because we had a big, it was just like a big house and our own private beach, and it was just wonderful. And it didn't cost us any more than if we'd just got a room at the hotel up the street, but we were lucky enough to get out in one of those. But only thing was we didn't get to stay there that long. And then going through England, and I was with Jason and Joan and Donna, and they were so good, so helpful to us, and made sure that we got to see everything, even above what the tour group did, because they had been there before, and Jason knew about this little town, constructed town in Wales, and we were the only ones that went to see it, and I think it was one of the highlights there. I was so glad that I didn't miss that, because it was wonderful. And of course I've loved the ones where we've gone, like in Guatemala and there, to go to the temple and places like that. That's been wonderful too. And Disney World, and ride all the roller coasters. My older son's name is Jason Carl Golden, and he was born April 23rd, 1947 in Payson, Utah. And Dennis is my second son, and he was born his name was Dennis Ray Golden, and he was born this July 2nd, 1950 in Payson Hospital. The day that Jason was born, I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I was having pains. It was past time when the doctor had said I should have him. He was supposed to have been born on the first part of April, and it was the 23rd. And the pains were not really hard, but I felt very uncomfortable, and so Don said should I go to work or should I stay home? And I told him no, to stay. He had to go to work. So as the day went on, they got pretty bad. And about 2 o'clock, I knew it was time for me to go to the hospital. And so I went out to get in the car. I was going to drive myself to the hospital, and I had a flat tire. And so there was no neighbors around, so I got the jack out and got the other spare tire off, and was starting to jack the car up when my nephew Roy Davis was coming home from school. He came over and he said, "What are you doing, Aunt Reve?" And I said I was getting ready to go to the hospital. And so he took off running, and he ran home and got his dad, and his dad was asleep. He was working graveyard, and they came up and got me and took me to the hospital. And they thought that he would be born right then, but the labor kind of stopped, and so it was slowed down and what have you. So Anyway, I was there until 11:30 that night when Jason was born, and it was funny because there was 4 other women that in that little Payson hospital waiting for the delivery room, so they were trying to get us all in and out fast, and so I didn't even get a chance to hold him. As soon as he was born, they had to wheel me out and him out, and all they did was show him to me and took off. They said, you'll have to wait till later to see your baby because we've got others waiting to get in. So I didn't have that first chance of holding him like a lot of women do, but it was worth it when he came back. And when they brought him in to me, the lady had 3 babies. She had one on each arm and one in the middle she was carrying in to show us, because after the other gals had delivered. And I told her, she said, I'll have to lay him down so I can give you a lay. I said, that middle one is mine. And she said, how do you know? You didn't even get to see your baby hardly. And I said, well, if that baby isn't mine, my husband's in big trouble. So she laid him down and looked at the tag, and sure enough, that was mine. And so she asked the other 2 if they knew. They didn't have a clue which one was theirs, but I knew immediately that Jason, that was my baby. When Dennis was born, it was on a Sunday afternoon, and his was a quick delivery. I didn't have a long time to wait. Matter of fact, I got to the hospital and they called the doctor, and he was on his way, and he just came in and delivered him and that. But he was he had real long black hair and long fingernails. Jason didn't have hardly any hair, and Jason was just, he weighed 8 pounds and 9 ounces, and Dennis weighed 6 pounds and 8 ounces, and Dennis had this long hair, and he was completely dehydrated when he was born, so they had to give him special nutrition shots and things. But his hair was, the nurse came in. Anyway, Dawn had to leave the next morning after he was born, and his mother was supposed to come up and get Jason because she was going to keep Jason while I was in the hospital, and she didn't. And Jason was 3 years and 3 months old when Dennis was born, and so my mom kept him and had that little feller walk clear to town with her every day to go to work because she was working in the library. And she took him to work with her, and she said he was good as gold, and she kept him the full time because his other grandmother never came and got him. And anyway, when Don came back he'd taken the scout troop down to Cedar Mountain while I was in the hospital, and I had blood clots in my legs, so they had to put heat lamps and stuff. I wasn't able to get out of bed or anything for that full week I was in there. And when he came home that day, I was the only one left the other girls had all gone home, and I was the only one in the hospital with him at that time. No, there was one other lady, I'll take it back. She came in that day. But the nurse came in and she said, would you mind if I braided your baby's hair? And I said, no, do you think it's long enough? And she said, yeah, I think it is, it's long enough. So she went, when she brought him in, he had little tiny braids with pink bows on the bottom. His braids were about this long. And she took him to everybody in the hospital to see that baby's hair that long. And when Don came, it was after visiting hours, and they told him he'd come in and see me. But when he walked down the nursery and saw Dennis laying there with braids and a pink bows on, the pink bows was more than he could handle. So he came in and he said, our baby's not, they've got pink bows in that baby's hair. And I said, I know, isn't it cute that it can be braided? No, it's not cute. So the next day I was released from the hospital. He came home, came in and gave Dennis a haircut when he was 6 days old. He got his first haircut. When my boys were, I don't know how old they were, but they were teasing me unmercifully. And Jason said to Dennis, okay, is today the day? And Dennis says, yeah. And they picked me up and set me on the counter, and they said, see, Mom, we're bigger than you are now, so we just want you to know we're bigger than you are. We can handle you. And they were teasing. They weren't mad or anything. They were teasing because I'd been. But I said I learned my boys were bigger than I thought they were when they picked me up and put me on the cupboard. Jason had polio, and we were not able to. He was in the Provo hospital, and we weren't able to see him for 6 weeks. We couldn't see him at all. They had him in isolation, and when we finally got over to see him, when we got there, I looked at him, and his face was skinned on the side. Well, I came unglued, and I went into the nurses, and I said, what has happened to my baby? You know, we'd call every day, but we couldn't talk to him. And she said that he was 4, and she said that they had these other 2 boys that were in there. They were brothers, and she said they were screaming and carrying on, and she said Jason climbed out of his crib and was in there telling those boys, stand one by each crib, telling them, don't cry, your mom will come one these days, don't cry, you'll be okay. She said he was acting as a comforter for those little boys, and she said when he fell out of the crib, climbing over, he fell and scraped his face, but she said he didn't even cry because he was too busy getting to those kids to make them tell him everything was all right. And she said they settled down after he talked to him, but she said he was like a little nurse. They were sorry that he'd skinned his face, and that was the story he told me too that had happened. That's why he got skinned. I came unglued. And then Dennis was hit with the car, and so he ended up being in the hospital. And he was only, he was only 2, about 2.5. And they, at the St. Rose de Lima, they came in and told me I couldn't stay the night with him, couldn't stay it. And he said, well, go home, Mom. I'm a big boy. He said, just go home. I can take care of myself. And he was just so brave about the whole thing. I said, both my boys, I was so proud of them because they acted so grown up for, being in the hospital and being by themselves. Of course, I went to the hospital the next day and spend all day with Dennis, but they wouldn't allow me to spend the night. I couldn't stay at night. And of course with Jason, until we got him out of the hospital, I could only see him 3 times a week for about an hour. And then when he came home, he was on a footboard. He had to stay in bed and exercise 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours at night with hot packs and scalding hot packs and exercises. And with Dennis, he was when he was hit with the car, he had this big bandage across because his ribs were broken, his collarbone and everything, and so he loved to show off his big bandage, his big Band-Aid to everybody. He thought that was clever because he had this big Band-Aid. And actually the way the bone broke and reknitted back, Dennis, when he was older, he was living in Wyoming and at work and was working on something electrical. I don't know what, I can't remember. He told me, but transformer something. And they had not put the electrical tape, they'd only put paper tape, and so he was electrocuted. And the shock, the level he was in, it went up through his elbow and hit his collarbone across and down. And they said something about, they noticed that where the collarbone had been broken, that it showed when he was electrocuted, gone through and hit that. But when the boys were able to go to Mutual and go out at night. They always had a curfew. They had to be home at certain times. We always had dinner at 5 o'clock, so the boys everybody had to be home at 5 so we could have family dinner together. And one of the house rules that we had was you don't take other people's things, boys, without asking. You always had to, if you wanted to borrow something, you had to ask. You couldn't just take. I think the most thing that I tried to teach my children was to be honest and try to be dependable. I think honesty was the one of the most important things that I tried to teach my children, was to be honest. You want them to be good, sturdy, strong men and dependable, and I learned to take care of themselves. And just having the boys was my proudest moment when they were born. And my proudest moment was to think whenever they'd achieve something. Of course, I was always proud of the things that they achieved and that they did, but I think the most proud I've ever been is the days that they were born. They were just exactly what I expected and what I wanted. Well, they both had very outgoing personalities. They had lots and lots of friends. Everybody liked them. They were well behaved, very well behaved. I was always, no matter where I went, I was always proud to take my boys because they behaved so well. I've had a lot of people tell me how well behaved they were and how polite and how kind they were, And Jason loved music. He was always, Dennis did too, but Jason seemed to be, he was always playing the radio with music or something, and he played the trumpet, and then he taught himself to play the guitar and the banjo, he did a little, and then he started out, he taught himself to play on a ukulele that he had, and he loved that, and they were both very interested in nature, like any animals or anything in the desert. They were very, very interested in rocks and fauna and anything that was in the desert, animals and what have you. Matter of fact, we always had a collection of wild animals, chipmunks, turtles, and stuff in our yard. We always had. They loved those, both of them. So it wasn't just one. But Jason had the biggest collection, I think, and he loved scouting. He was very, when he was maybe not the first year. One year when he went to scout camp, the leader went with them and left him because they wouldn't let his wife stay. So he just left them up there, and the boys that were there, Don went up to pick him up and to bring him home, and the counselors had said that they were upset because nobody had came up to be with him, and of course he didn't know because the man that left him didn't tell anybody. And he said, well, were the boys unruly? And he said, absolutely not. He said, the thing of it is, he picked Jason and his friend. He said, those two are just like the leaders in the camp. He said, they saw to it that everything was done. They passed off all their merit badges and everything, so that's why we never called the bishop, your bishop, to tell him to come and get him. He said he was definitely a leader in this group. And when when he went for his what was it, ROTC training or what have you, I can't remember. No, it wasn't that. When he was in the reserve, I guess, I don't know. Anyway, the minute he was there, they immediately, and I still have the letter, put him to be a platoon leader because of his leadership that he had. And he had, he was very, very stalwart at church. He had, I think he has 6 or 7 individual awards that for going 100% to church, and I still have those all the time. And he was very active in the church, very active, and in scouting, and he was good in. He was chosen. When he was in high school, they chose him to go out to the convention center. They were having a big, it was the first year they had, it was called the World Congress of Flight Convention at the convention center. And they had him go out in his uniform and was representing the scouts there. And I have a picture of him at that. And so he seemed like all through that leadership abilities that he had, you know, he was and he loved the outdoors. He just loved the outdoors, and he liked to fish. He loved to fish, and he used to like to hunt. And of course, Don taught the boys to hunt when they were little. He wouldn't let them have a .22. He said if they're old enough to shoot a gun, they're old enough to shoot a .22. He wouldn't let them have a BB gun, I mean. He'd let them have a .22 but not a BB gun. And Jason was a good dancer, very good dancer. He got fairly good grades in school. And he was in a group. He had a dance band. They had a dance band that played for the high school dances when he was in school. He played the bass guitar. He was in school plays. He grew a beard so that he could be the father in one of the plays at high school. And looked very handsome, I should say. And Jason was also in, when he was in high school, he was for their homecoming, he was one of the royalty in the homecoming one year, and he's always been, and he was, I can't remember what, but he was one of the city officials when for Scout Day, he had been, both boys had for that, so, and he has a good voice. He sang, you know, he and one of his roommates used to sing at BYU on their assemblies a few times, and he sang in high school some, and of course with the band and that, and all the girls liked him. I'm still hearing people that say, "Oh, are those your boys?" And they had a crush on him, both of them. So, and Dennis was a very independent little boy. Well, both boys were, I should say, but he was. Dennis never met a stranger, though. He was always bringing the underdog home with kids, you know, that first day of school he'd bring them home, meet, you know, he was always befriending them. And when he was little, he was tagged around with Jason all the time. He was, you know, behind his big brother. Dennis loved to fish too, and he loved to swim, and Dennis was really good in scouting too. He loved to in scouting. As a matter of fact, he still is in scouting. He's never stopped, and has his Silver Beaver Award. And he he was he's in Who's Who of America for junior colleges for being one of the best social vice presidents of the student body. And he's been president of the school board in Wyoming. He's been on the High Council and in the bishopric in the church. And he has, like I said, his Silver Beaver in scouting he's earned. He's been in scouting all the time. He was been on the district and been scoutmaster in Mutual and what have you. And Dennis is a really good dancer too. He's especially good in ballroom dancing. He took lessons, of course, to do that. And he was always very active in church. And he ran on the, I think he ran in track in high school. Jason took football and basketball, but his polio had kind of slowed him down. But swimming, both my boys are just like fish. They're excellent swimmers because they learned to swim. Because Jason, when he had polio, we'd take him out to the lake every day. We moved here in May, and every day except Sundays until it got too cold in October, we went to the lake so that he could get his therapy, because the doctor that he had over with polio wouldn't release him to any doctor in Henderson. He just said take him to the lake and make him learn to swim. So that's what they did. Well, naturally, with Dennis going along, Dennis learned to swim too. So the boys were excellent swimmers. And matter of fact, they swam clear across the lake one day with their dumb mother sitting on the bank, just about having a heart attack. But a guy with a boat came along and said he'd follow them to sea, and they made it over and back fine without any problem. But I was a nervous wreck. And he was popular with the girls too. He's not as popular, as much so. He didn't date as he didn't go to the proms and things until he was a senior much, where Jason did. And they were both extremely dependable. If they were out, I always knew they would come home on time, or they called or what have you. As a matter of fact, if they didn't, I would be berserk, because I knew that something was wrong, because they were so dependable about letting me know where they were and what they were doing. They were great at that. And they've just been very good to their mother. They both were excellent marksmen. Shooting, they were good. Dennis played the guitar a little bit, but nothing like Jason. And he's an avid fisher too. He loves to fish. Still does. He does a lot of fishing. As a matter of fact, he told his girls that when they got married, the guys that they married, one of the requisitions they had to like to fish. He had rules. They had to be returned missionaries, Eagle Scouts, and learn to fish, or like to fish. And I know the first two are passed the test, but I'm not sure about Carly's husband. I don't think he was an Eagle Scout and been on a mission, but I don't know whether he liked to fish or not, because I don't know him that well. But the other two, they do. And both my boys worked all the time and were very hard workers, exceptionally hard workers. Everywhere they worked, I've had people tell me what good workers they are and what good jobs they did. And they had paper routes and They did everything from washing windows up on the golf course, people up there, and they both worked in stores, and they worked in fast food places, and they both worked at the plant. Well, they both worked at Stauffer, and then Jason worked at Petcon, and Dennis worked at State Stove Plant. So they've always been hard workers and worked when they were kids. They very good workers, and they got good grades in school. We had our boys loved to camp and what have you, and we went up to Yosemite one time, and the boys were small, and we were camping right next to some other people that were from New Jersey, and it was cold up there, but Don was fishing, and the boys decided they wanted to go. There was a little lake there, and they wanted to go swimming, and I told them, I said, it's too cold. No, Mom, we want to go swimming. So because they were both excellent swimmers. They just really could swim. And so I said, well, okay, it's cold, but if you want to go, you can go. And so they went out, and I was watching, and I was standing. I could see them from where we were camped. Oh, the woman came up to me, and she said, look at those boys, how tan they are. She said, I wonder how old they are and whose they are. And she said, can you believe that? They're out there swimming. And I said, well, they're my sons. And she said, they are? And I said, yes. And she said, where are you from? And I told her. And she said, how old are they? And I told her. And she said, oh, my word. She said, I can't believe this. She said, look at them. And I want you to look at my two boys at the same age as yours. She said, look at my poor little pale-faced kids. And she said, I want my boys to be like yours. And where do you live? And I told her, and she said, we've got to get out of New Jersey. I've got to come out west. So anyway, while we were there, my boys tried to get her boys to play with them and what have you, and she just kept marveling at how the amount of confidence my boys had, the things they could do. They'd go climbing and what have you, and her boys could do nothing. So when we left, she gave me a hug, and she said, I'm going to talk my husband into moving. And so she called. This was in the summer, and it was in the fall. I got this telephone call from her, and she called me, and she said they were moving to San Diego. She said, after I saw your boys and how well they behave and all of the things that they do, their confidence that they have and the skills that they can do, she said, I decided we have to move west because I want my boys to be just like your boys. Oh, yeah, we were camping up up in Panguitch Lake, and we called and told my brother Ward to come down and go with us. So he came down and went with us, and we were sitting around. Don and Ward and the boys had been out fishing, and then they came in and we had dinner, and we were sitting around the campfire at night, and I don't remember whether it was Jason or Dennis, but one of them asked Ward how come he had never married. And he said, oh, I don't know. And I said, no, I want to know too. I said, I've always wondered why you have remained a bachelor. And he said that when my father died, now he was 17 when my father died, and my Uncle Wilford had told him that his job was to take care of his mother and his sisters, and that he was not to ever get married anymore. And he said, I took him literally, so I quit dating. Said I decided I wasn't going to date or get married because since my father had died, it was my responsibility. And he helped provide for the family his whole life because of that. And by the time he realized that Mother didn't want him to do that, it was too late. He said he was too shy. He didn't everybody, all the good girls were married or what have you. So he went in the service. He served in this first group of Seabees that went, he, in the South Pacific during the war. He was down there all the time in the first group of, matter of fact, I still have his yearbook of the first group of Seabees. He joined that because he had been in the CCC, which is a Civilian Conservation Corps, before, and he had had some National Guard training, so he didn't even go to boot camp or anything. He just went right from Utah to the South Pacific and he went in as a petty officer, but I don't remember which kind directly, but that because he, when he enlisted in the Seabees, so. I have special memories of each grandchild, certain things. I loved having them. We would have Jennifer and Amber and Brittany and Aubrey would come, and all 4 girls together. And each time they came, Don bought a little pool for outside, and they'd go outside and swim and what have you, and then they'd come in and do their hair, and then they'd go out and swim again, come in and do their hair. But I taught them, each time they came, I taught them a different dance, so they liked that. And then they'd always make something like, they made costumes and they made pillows and painted things while they were here, and I would let them choose. They could decide what they wanted to do and where they wanted to go. And then they had things they liked to do, like they liked to go to circus and see the acts that they had there or play the games. And they liked to go watch the airplanes come in and at the airport take off and land. And they liked to go to see the Omnimax at the Caesar's Palace. We'd go out to see that Omnimax movie. They loved to do that. And they liked to go over and see them sink the ships and the volcanoes at the Mirage and the Treasure Island. And they liked to go to the lake, and we went up to Mount Charleston, and they liked to go to McDonald's and they collected the little things that came in the Happy Meals at McDonald's, all 4 of them, but they were fun to have. We had 2 bicycles, so they'd take turns riding the bicycles, Don's and mine, and mostly they spent most of their time though out in the pool. And we took them to Wet and Wild. They loved to go to Wet and Wild, so I bought little individual rafts that they could take and use at Wet and Wild, and so the girls loved to do that. And we just had a good time all the time they were here. They were fun. The girls got along with each other really well, and they each had the only thing, they all wanted the same bath towel. We'd have to take turns using the same beach towel. They liked that one particular one, but we had a good time, each one, and they were very, very well behaved. It was a pleasure to take them out when we'd go out on the places, down the strip or in the hotels, or we'd go out to the buffets to eat or something. They were extremely well behaved, and they were fun. Each one of them had their own, and they added something to the group. Each one contributed something, and we had just a fun time with them. And the thing of it is, I admire them, especially now that they're older and they're mothers, and to see how well they've turned out. They're great girls, all 4 of them. And they're very good to me. But each one, they all they're beautiful girls, and each one they look different, but they're all extremely beautiful girls, and they have sweet personalities, and couldn't ask for better. If I'd picked them myself, I couldn't have found better girls than those are. And then when the boys came, we only had 2 boys. Well, Andrew came a time or 2 with just the girls when the girls came. But one thing with Andrew is as he's gotten older, every time he'd come to Vegas since Jennifer's gotten married, he always sets aside one day to spend with Grandma. And we go to dinner, or we've gone out to Prim to ride the roller coaster, and we've gone up to Valley of Fire, and we rode the thing out at the lake, and he's always takes one day for Grandma, and when he comes. And then with Strider and Dallas, when they would come, they were extremely neat boys. They kept their room so clean. I couldn't believe it was boys, but they always kept the room they never threw anything around. They were never messy at all. Extremely clean, and had so much fun, and such bubbly personalities. I love to have them come, because they were, and no matter what you tell them you want to do, it was okay. It was okay with them. Never any contention at all. And we took them camping out at the lake, and they were just a delight. This campground, everybody thought they were the cutest boys there ever was, and they were. And they just were fun to be around. Just really fun. I could see each one of them. I can see something of their dad in them, that reminded me of when he was growing up, and they've turned out to be great guys too as they're older. I'm really proud of all of my grandchildren, every one of them. I'm so glad that they're my grandchildren. And I know with Dallas, we went out to ride roller coasters, and I had to ride twice. And he didn't like it, but he rode it with me anyway, just to be a good guy. And he used to make a funny little face. It was really funny, and I happened to get it on camera. We always wanted to get that picture of Dallas with his funny little face. And I got the picture of it, took it one time, and Dallas made me 2 rings out of Pop-Top cans that I still have, and he won me a little hippo at playing a game, and he wanted to get me a pig, but he got a hippo instead, and I still have it until today, and I'm giving it to Brooke. When we were camping, he'd always bring me flowers. He'd gather up flowers and bring to me. And Strider was, when he was little, he would always, I don't know how he'd manage, but I could be holding one of the other kids, and he'd always manage to get him off and be sitting in the middle of my lap. He'd get up on my lap, and when he was little, he didn't talk. You never heard him talk till they came down the day after Christmas, and he had gotten a little plastic gun, and he'd go around shooting everybody. Well, they'd shoot him, and they'd fall over, and then they'd get back up. Well, he shot me. He went pow to me, and I didn't get up. And he yelled, "Are you all right, Grandma?" And we all just about died, because he hadn't been talking at all. But he just came running over, "Are you all right, Grandma?" And his dad says, Strider, you can talk. And he just said, yeah, he could talk, but he just hadn't been doing much talking. Brittany was doing most of the talking. But we all just about fainted when he said, you all right, Grandma? Just as because he hadn't been talking at all. And the thing I regret is I haven't been able to spend as much time with my grandchildren as I'd like, being so far away. It's, you only got to see them on visits, and so I've missed a lot of the things that I would really like to have been able to participate in or to see. But I've loved every minute when they came to visit. They've just been really fun. I know Dallas and Strider, when they came, I had to go show them where their dad had been out in the desert. We drove out and showed them where they used to go and spend the night or hunt and they'd go out hunting squirrels or chipmunks, I should say, out in the desert. And it reminded me so much of their dad and when he was little, the things that he would do, But they're good-looking guys, too. They've turned out to be very handsome young men. I'm proud of them, all my grandchildren. Carly was, when she was little, Carly just loved Don. She wouldn't, no matter, she followed him around when she was a baby. She was just tiny when he died, but she just took to Don like ever. And then I remember when I went to Disneyland, I had such a good time going. I took Carly and Andrew with me, and then Dennis and Colleen took the older girls, and we had such a good time. We rode all the little kid rides, and she kept wanting to ride and go back and see It's a Small World. We must have seen that 3 or 4 times while she was there. She had such a good time watching it. And then when she and Andrew came down and spent the summer, they spent some time with me in the summer. And she was quite a game little gal. She wasn't feeling well, but she decided she wanted to go out to the theme park out at the circus, and so we all went out there, and she rode all the rides and what have you. But the next day she wasn't feeling too good. She had the flu, but she hurried and got better so she could spend the rest of the time on the strip. And then I've had a lot of fun with Carly off and on. It's fun to take her and her girlfriends out to the strip one night, and she's just been a joy. We were at a family reunion, which Jason's family always came. I don't think they missed any of them. They always came to every family reunion. It was the Hendrickson family reunion. And so we were playing cards. I don't remember what kind of cards we were playing, but with Dallas and Strider and Brittany and me, and we were sitting at the table, a camp table up in the mountain, and no matter what I did, I couldn't win. I couldn't get anything for my hand to build my hand. I can't remember the card game, and they'd always win. I never could do anything. And finally, after about 3 or 4 games, I was getting tired of it. And I said, well, how come I never could get anything? You guys are getting everything, and I can't even get a decent card. And Strider or Dallas, I don't know which, one of them said, well, should we tell her? And I said, tell me what? And they said, we can see your hand in your glasses, so we know not to give you anything. And I have a picture of that, but I did have it, but Brittany has it. I'm so grateful for all of my grandkids and the fun that I've had with them, and I admire every one of them and love them so much. And I admire my sons, and I especially admire their wives too, because I love their wives, and I love my grandsons' in-law and my granddaughter-in-law. I especially love my little great-grandchildren. I want them to know that I'm so grateful to have them in my life that I'm going to cry. And I don't want to do that. But it's been wonderful to, that the joys that I've had with all of my family. And I can't imagine anybody going through life and not having a family. And I also am very grateful for for my step-grandchildren and great-grandchildren, because they have a special place in my heart also, and I'm very grateful to have them in my life. Well, I do want to say that how proud I am of all of my family, every one of them. I'm proud of the lives that they're living and the things that they're doing, and I'm especially proud of my boys for, the men that they've turned out to be. I'm grateful to be their mother. And I'm grateful to still be alive to see all my family. I guess when you get old, you start to think, it's not too long before you're going to be gone. And every visit that you have or every phone call, it means so much to you. And it does to me, I know, because that's a part of my life. It's just whatever the interaction that I have with my family. And I want to tell them all to do their very best in whatever they do. Try. If you give it your all, then you've got it made. And did I tell them I loved them? Okay. I want my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren and my children to know that I have a strong testimony of this gospel. That I have had, it has been my life, and I know that it's true. I know that our church is true, and I know that the Savior lives, and our Heavenly Father lives, and I know that He hears and answers prayers, because since Don died, I've totally had to rely on the Lord and His blessing, so I know that it's true. And I want them to know that it's true. And the more I'm around other people and other religions, it makes my testimony even stronger. And I just hope that, I just wish all of them could come back into the church. Because I worry about their salvation if they're not members of, going to church. And so I know that President Hinckley is our prophet, and I know that Joseph Smith was a prophet, and the more I, have studied and read, it just makes it even more true that I know it's true. And I'm so grateful that I've been born and raised in the church, and that I've had the church to rely on, because it's been part of my life, a big part of my life, because all the positions that I've held and what have you in the church, everything from Cub Scouting to, the higher positions I've held in the church has been, and I just know that it's right, and I'm grateful that I've been a member. Maybe not as good as I should have been all the time, but I'm so grateful, and every time that I go to the temple, it makes me even more grateful that I'm a member of the church.